I felt my heart stop as Robert's words sank in. The vintage ring collection my grandmother had spent her life curating, gone. Sold off while I was on a 2-week trip to visit my sick aunt. Got a decent price too, Robert continued, leaning against my bedroom doorframe. About time someone turned those dusty old things into real money. I carefully folded a sweater, keeping my movements deliberate and calm. And what did you do with the money, Robert? He shrugged, adjusting his new expensive watch. Invested it. That's what your mother and I do, we make smart financial decisions. Unlike you hanging on to all the sentimental junk. My name is Elizabeth Chen, and at 34, I was watching my stepfather gloat about selling the last connection I had to my grandmother. What he didn't know was that those rings weren't just family heirlooms. They were evidence. Well, I said, placing another sweater in the drawer, I suppose you're right. Can't live in the past forever. Robert's smug smile faltered. He'd expected tears, anger, maybe even a dramatic confrontation. My calm acceptance threw him off balance. Your mother agrees with me, he added, clearly trying to justify himself. She says it's time you moved on. Grace has been gone 5 years now. Grace. My grandmother's name felt wrong coming from his mouth. She'd never trusted Robert. Saw through his charm from the moment my mother brought him home 8 years ago. Watch that one, she'd warned me. He's got sticky fingers and a silver tongue. If only we'd listened. 3 years into my mother's marriage, our family business, a successful chain of high-end jewelry stores my grandparents built from nothing, started showing signs of trouble. Robert, who had convinced my mother to make him CFO, insisted it was just market fluctuations. But Grace knew better. She began collecting evidence, documenting discrepancies, tracking suspicious transactions. The rings she collected weren't just beautiful pieces. Each one told a story. A story Robert would have found very interesting if he'd ever bothered to look closer. As I unpacked, I remembered the last conversation I'd had with Grace before she passed. The proof is in the collection, she said, her voice weak but sharp as ever. Each ring, each provenance document, it's all there. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. I hadn't understood back then. But over the years, as I watched Robert drain our family's wealth while maintaining his facade of success, I started to piece it together. Where did you sell them? I asked casually, hanging up a dress. I might know someone interested in vintage jewelry. Robert waved a dismissive hand. Some dealer in Chicago. Gish. No questions asked. Best way to handle these things. Phew. That fit perfectly with what I'd suspected. Well, I said, closing my empty suitcase, I should get some rest. Long flight. Robert lingered in the doorway, unsatisfied with my lack of reaction. But what could he say? He thought he'd achieved his goal. The rings were gone, and with them, any proof of his creative accounting. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for months. After decoding my grandmother's meticulous notes, I discovered the truth. Each ring corresponded to a specific transaction, a key to unraveling Robert's embezzlement. And thanks to Grace's foresight, I had digital copies of everything. Certificates, appraisals, and her handwritten notes, all stored securely in the cloud, waiting for this day. That night, I lay in bed listening to the house settle. Through the wall, I heard Robert's voice. She didn't even cry, he said, sounding annoyed. Just accepted it like it meant nothing. Maybe she's finally growing up, my mother replied. Learning to let go of the past, like you've been saying. I smiled in the dark, pulling my phone from under the pillow. It was time. Text to Michael, FBI Financial Crimes Division. It's done. He sold the collection, Chicago dealer, cash transaction. Michael's reply came fast. Perfect. That completes the pattern. We move forward with the investigation. You sure about this? No turning back. I thought of Grace, how hard she'd worked to build the business, how Robert had spent years draining it while pretending to protect us. I'm sure, I typed back. Time to finish what Grace started. The next morning, I drove to our flagship store in downtown Seattle. The business now had 12 locations across the Pacific Northwest, each one making less profit every year despite steady sales. As I walked through the showroom, nodding to familiar faces, I remembered trailing behind Grace as a child, listening to her talk about more than just jewelry. She taught me about integrity. Elizabeth. Robert's voice boomed across the store. He strode toward me, arms open in his usual exaggerated way. "Didn't expect to see you today. Thought you'd be resting after your trip. Just wanted to check in," I said lightly, noticing how several employees stiffened as he approached. They knew something was wrong even if they couldn't prove it. "Everything's fine," Robert said too quickly. "In fact, I was just about to make some calls about a new investment opportunity. Very promising. Another shell company, I thought. Another fake supplier. The same pattern Grace had uncovered. Sounds interesting," I said. "Maybe we could discuss it over lunch? I'd love to learn more about the business side of things." Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. In 8 years I'd never shown interest in his finances. My sudden curiosity clearly unsettled him. "Sure," he said slowly. "Lunch tomorrow. I've got some meetings today that can't wait." "Of course," I smiled. "Tomorrow's perfect." Then as he turned to leave I added, "Oh, and Robert, thank you for handling grandmother's rings. You're right, it's time for some changes around here." He paused, studying my face for any sign of sarcasm or hidden meaning. He found none. But that night when the agents knocked on his office door he finally understood what those dusty old rings were really worth. Robert nodded and continued toward his office. As soon as he was gone I sent another text to Michael. He took the bait. Getting nervous about my sudden interest in the business. His reply came seconds later. "Good. Keep him talking. We've traced the Chicago dealer. Just need a few more days to document the connection." I walked slowly through the store, brushing my fingertips along familiar displays. The scent of polished wood and velvet brought back Grace's lessons about quality and craftsmanship. Robert thought he'd erased her presence by selling her ring collection. But in truth he'd sealed his own fate. Those rings, and their meticulously documented histories, were the final pieces of evidence needed to prove his years of financial fraud. Tomorrow's lunch would be interesting indeed. But first I had one more stop to make. The cemetery was quiet when I arrived, the autumn wind rustling through the trees and carrying the scent of rain. I placed fresh flowers on Grace's grave and whispered, "It's happening, Gran. Everything you predicted. Everything you prepared for." Robert finally made his move. I touched the simple gold band on my right hand, the only ring from her collection that hadn't been in the house when Robert made his sale. She'd given it to me the day before she died, along with a single piece of paper that had seemed meaningless at the time. Now that paper, combined with her records, would bring down the man who'd spent years stealing from our family while pretending to protect it. "You were right," I said softly. "The truth always comes out. Sometimes it just needs a little help." The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, typical Seattle weather. I arrived at Luciano's, Robert's favorite overpriced Italian restaurant, 5 minutes early. He was already there nursing a martini. "Elizabeth," he said, standing as I approached. "Glad you could make it. I ordered you a glass of wine." "Just water for me," I told the hovering waiter. "I need a clear head for business discussions." Robert's smile tightened. "Of course. Always so serious, just like Grace." I opened my bag and pulled out a small notebook. "Speaking of Grace," I said lightly, "I've been going through some of her old business records. Fascinating stuff." The martini paused halfway to his lips. "Old records? What kind of records?" "Oh, I said casually, transaction histories, supplier contracts, investment details." She was very meticulous about documentation. "Did you know she kept a separate file for each piece in her ring collection? Every purchase, every certification, every connection to the business." Robert set his glass down with a sharp click. "Those files were destroyed years ago, during the office renovation." "The physical copies, yes," I agreed, smiling faintly. But Grace believed in backups. Digital copies, stored securely. She was quite forward-thinking for her generation. The color drained from his face. "You're bluffing. There's no way she—" A new voice interrupted him. "Mr. Robert Lewis?" We both turned. 2 men in suits stood by our table. "I'm Agent Michael Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We need you to come with us." What happened next was almost cinematic. Robert tried to run, knocking over the table in his haste. He made it 3 steps before another agent blocked his path. The restaurant fell silent as he was handcuffed and led away, still protesting his innocence. I sat calmly, sipping my water. "Miss Chen," Agent Chen said after Robert had been taken out. "We'll need you to come down to the office to make a formal statement." "Of course," I replied, gathering my things. "Just let me call my mother first." That call was the hardest part. My mother, brilliant at the creative side of our business, had trusted Robert completely with the finances. Hearing that her husband had been stealing from us for years broke her. As she sobbed on the phone, I knew we'd done the right thing. The truth would hurt, but lies had already cost us too much. At the FBI office, I laid everything out. Grace's documentation, the connection between her ring collection and Robert's fraud, the web of shell companies and fake suppliers he'd used to drain our business. "Your grandmother was brilliant," Agent Chen said, flipping through the files. "Each ring's provenance contains coded references to fraudulent transactions. When arranged chronologically, it forms a perfect paper trail." "He tried to erase the evidence," I explained. "Selling the rings was his mistake. It confirmed their connection to his crimes." The investigation moved fast. The Chicago dealer was found, one of Robert's longtime accomplices, laundering money through fake jewelry purchases. The rings were recovered, each still carrying its damning documentation. Facing overwhelming evidence, Robert took a plea deal: 8 years in federal prison and full restitution of the stolen funds. The total shocked even me, nearly $12 million siphoned over 7 years. My mother filed for divorce immediately. She threw herself into rebuilding the company, channeling her grief into action. Together, we modernized operations, strengthened security, and restored our family's reputation. 6 months later, I stood in the flagship store's newly renovated vault, carefully arranging Grace's recovered ring collection in a special display case. Each piece gleamed under the lights, telling its own story of justice served. "Your grandmother would be proud," my mother said softly beside me. "Not just of saving the business, but of how you handled everything. You did it her way, patient, methodical, letting the truth speak for itself." I touched the simple gold band on my hand, Grace's last gift. She taught me that the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about standing up for what's right no matter how long it takes. That evening, I returned to Grace's grave. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and clean. I placed her favorite white roses beside the headstone. "We did it, Gran," I whispered. "Your plan worked perfectly. Robert never saw it coming. He was so busy looking down on us, he never looked close enough to see what was right in front of him." I told her about the business, how it was thriving again, how her ring collection now stood as a symbol of integrity and strength. As I drove home, I passed the federal detention center where Robert was serving his sentence. I didn't stop. Didn't even slow down. He was part of our past now, a cautionary tale about greed, trust, and vigilance. The next morning, a package arrived at the store. Inside was a letter from Robert's former secretary and a stack of documents. "I always knew something was wrong," she wrote. "But I was too afraid to speak up. Your grandmother once told me that the truth has a way of surfacing, like a diamond rising through rock." He was right. These are copies of everything I saved just in case someone was brave enough to act. I added the papers to our archives beside Grace's coded records. Together they told a story of greed, betrayal, and ultimate justice. But more importantly, they told a story of wisdom passed down through generations of strong women. Our business thrived once more. We founded the Grace Chen Foundation, providing scholarships for women in business and forensic accounting. Each recipient received a small gold ring, a reminder that patience, intelligence, and documentation are the most powerful weapons against corruption. Years later, when Robert was released from prison, his lawyer sent a letter full of apologies and excuses, asking for forgiveness. I sent back a single photograph, Grace's ring collection, restored and gleaming, each piece labeled with the evidence it had carried. No message was necessary. The truth, as Grace had always said, speaks for itself. Some called it karma. Others called it justice. But I knew what it really was. The power of a grandmother's love and wisdom, preserved in a collection of rings more valuable than anyone had imagined. The final paper she'd given me now hangs framed in my office. In her graceful handwriting it reads, "The truth is like a fine diamond. It may be hidden for years, but its value never diminishes. Keep watching, keep waiting, and when the time is right, let it shine." And shine it did, bringing light to darkness and justice to those who thought they were above it. Just as Grace had planned all along.